Hi everyone, welcome to Soul Creativity. This is Naven. Sorry we're running a little bit late. Um, I wanted to welcome everybody, whether you're listening live or you catch the show later. The comment section is up, so Stacey and I will be looking forward to that if you have any comments or questions. And you can use the comment section, if you catch the show, later as well. So just keep that in mind. And I want to welcome tonight here's guest Stacey Couch. Stacey is a spiritual director, and I'm really anxious to dive into this subject. We haven't really talked about spirituality in this exact format before, Stacey. So I think it's going to be very interesting to everyone. I'm really interested in, talking to you about spirituality and the subject of the soul and everything that kind of goes around that. So, really excited. And I do want to take one moment just to show everyone your book, Gracious Wild, because this was such an important book to me, and I've read it several times and have mentioned it to a lot of people. So I just wanted to show it to everyone in case they want to grab a copy for themselves, which I really recommend. So, welcome to the show, Stacey, and let's get started. Um, I think we'll open with just talking about spirituality, what fascinates you about it, and about the subject of the soul.
Yeah. Thank you, Naven. And thanks for showing my book. It's like seeing my baby.
I understand.
Yeah. It'll be the 10th anniversary of its publishing next year. So yeah.
2013, yeah,
Yeah.
that's when it was published.
Yeah. And it feels like many lifetimes ago at this point. But yeah. So in terms of spirituality and the soul, I've been drawn into many different aspects of this spiritual teachings and a spiritual life, but just in general, I'm constantly engrossed in this topic of where is the soul, where is the soul in the world, and really just am amazed over and over again how we see sparks of the divine in everything around us, that the mystical is really here in the mundane. And even though we're working with something that is sometimes part of the senses, but also beyond the senses, something that's so great and so vast and so hard to understand and really grasp, we still get to have this intimate connection with it at the same time. It's just so paradoxical, and it requires so much imagination, and so much more than words too.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love obviously working with nature, with animals, signs in nature, and symbols and archetypes both. It really, those are the language of the soul. We are so used to using words, but to be able to connect through these symbols and images and archetypes, we really then have an opportunity to learn more about the language of the soul and what the soul is trying to say to us, both the soul, our own soul, and also the soul of the world that we are in. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I really like that, terminology, the soul of the world. I think it kind of reminds me of, I often talk about that spark of God that's like within us, but we're in the divine and the divine is in us.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think of it as that same type of a thing when you're talking about the soul of the world.
Yeah.
It doesn't keep us separate from the divine. So I like that.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, it seems like a pretty broad, um, area, and it encompasses a lot of different philosophies and thoughts. And so I'm wondering, as a spiritual director in the work that you do, are you devoted to a specific, spiritual practice or religion, or do you feel like it encompasses more than a single stream of thought?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had trouble, and a lot of people that I meet too are similar in that I've trouble picking just one, and and so in by and large, I would say different religion. So there's shamanism, of course, which is really my foundation. But also in terms of religions or mystical teachings that are out there, I do really connect with Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Sufism. So I am really just kind of going where I'm led, going where the thread leads me. So I'll find one teacher or author and really resonate with what they're sharing. And then they'll recommend or mention, or I'll see them do a podcast with somebody else, and then I'll follow that to somebody else. And so I end up definitely following this meandering path, but also going deep at the same time. So there definitely can be that criticism for those of us that are what could be called interspiritual, or having multiple disciplines that we are engaging with. There can be that criticism of being a spiritual dilettante, where you're just like that little hummingbird going around and taking a little bit of nectar out of each flower, but not ever really staying in one. And so the criticism can be, well, you're digging a bunch of shallow wells and never getting to water. That can be one of the criticisms that can come across. And I've heard the teaching about this, that, well, no, I'm digging a deep well. I'm just using many different tools. So I definitely feel like in my practice that it does get deeper and deeper. And no matter which text I am engaged with, or which teaching or teacher I'm learning about, that the depth of it continues to increase over time. Yeah. So there is that breadth, but there's also a deepening that's really an important value of mine. Yeah.
I think also, as we look, because I do the same thing, and, I think what we find is there are common threads through all the different practices, or, religions or spiritual practices anyway. So I feel like it's a very natural thing to follow those threads as you're studying. And it's actually, it leads to a greater understanding as you expand. But it doesn't mean that you can't go deep,
Right.
as you were saying. So I like that idea. I'm wondering, like, when you have a client, or even for yourself, how do you choose, like, what spiritual teachings might suit you at that time, or suit your client, and how or how you choose, which spiritual teachings you might work with?
Yeah, so it's definitely me. It's personalized, right? So it's just listening to my own intuition and whatever is coming up for me. So recently, a course on the Bhagavad Gita, which is a famous text in Hindu religion, came available, and for me, I was in a inner conflict, and I thought, wow, the inner battlefield, and really learning more about the inner battlefield. So a lot of it's looking at paying attention to what's going on in my own interior and in my own life, and where I'm in need of more wisdom, where I'm in need of more support and understanding, and then just listening to kind of what comes up and what's available around me. And sometimes it's as simple as it's a book I already have on my shelf, and I've already read it before, but I'm called back to it again. So that it requires a good deal of listening interiorly. And then when I'm working with clients, it is also a listening, but it's listening to them, and listening to what their beliefs are, what different spiritual teachings resonate with them. Some people really resonate more with teachings in nature, so we go more towards the shamanic route, and looking at teachings and practices in the shamanic tradition. And other people are more Christian oriented or Buddhist oriented, and so I listen to what resonates with them, and then draw from teachings. So that's where it's helpful for me to have a breadth of knowledge, because I can draw from teachings from where suits people. Some people are more rational, intellectual. Usually Buddhism is a little bit more helpful for them. And some people still are very rooted in the Christian tradition. And there's a lot of, great ways to approach that as well. So, yeah.
Exactly. I want to talk to you about what type of clients you work with, what type of people are seeking spiritual direction. I know on your website, I really liked how you had it worded, like spiritual pioneers, and they're bravely going into the mystical or the mystery. I think that, to me, that really excites me. When I see that on your website, I'm instantly drawn to it. But before I ask you about that, I just wanted to say something when you were mentioning, um, your early work with in the shamanic tradition. I was thinking how many of us, and we probably don't always think of it this way. It wasn't until I started exploring shamanism as a path when I was an adult, that I realized I had already been tied to that all of my
Mm.
life, beginning with childhood. And so I think, if a lot of people look back to that, they would realize they were probably really drawn to, because I think it's natural almost for children to be
Mhm.
drawn more to earthy, just maybe because you're spending more time in play, and you're using your imagination and connecting. So I just wanted to add that, add that in, and you can comment on that if you want. But as you were talking about that, it just made me think back to my childhood, and how I wouldn't have obviously known that wording at that time.
Yeah.
But it came back as, like almost full circle as I did start studying, shamanism. Um, so, feel free if you want to comment on it at all, but then also we'll move into, who's seeking spiritual direction, and, what type of students and clients that you work with.
Yeah. So, in regards to the shamanic piece, it's interesting. I came to know about shamanism young. I
Mhm.
was probably around 12 years old when I first started learning about spirit animals
Wow.
and journey work and all of that. But at the time, I just read about it and thought, well, I really thought to myself, like, this isn't in my lineage. Like, from what I had was reading, it was, seemed to be something that you had to have in your grandmother or your mother, and that needed to
Hmm.
be passed down to you through the generations, had to be something in your lineage or in your family. And I thought, well, it's not in my lineage, so I guess I don't get to do that. But I thought, wow, I'd really like to do that when I grow up. Um, so it really did help me when I started doing my research. That's a lot of people who get to know me know that I'm, very much research oriented. So I
Hmm.
definitely like to balance the right and the left brain, and the left brain part of me is very much a researcher. And so as I did the reading, started digging into the anthropological records, and also looking at other academics who'd gone around and studied shamanic cultures all over the world. What I and even today, still, as I study myth and fairy tales and stories around the world, shamanic traditions are in every culture. They're on every continent, and they go back to the roots of every culture. There are certain universal or archetypal elements of shamanic practice that come through. And the really amazing thing is, this how we know it's the archetypal piece, is that the amazing thing is that these shamanic practices arose on these different continents in these different cultures independently before any of these peoples were talking to each other. So any of us can really honestly say that our genetics, our history, our ancestry goes back. As you go far enough back, you're going to find shamanic traditions in your genetic line. So that's really helped in terms of, if you feel a calling to it, giving yourself permission to go to it. It's one thing to practice for yourself as an inner question journey, and another thing, and that's a whole nother conversation, to do the work for other people, and how do you get there and decide about that. But in terms of studying shamanism as a spiritual path for yourself, really all of us have access to it because it's in all of our DNA.
Hmm.
So there's definitely that. And then in terms of the clients and students that come to work with me, I see a very wide range of I don't want to necessarily say ability, but a wide range of familiarity, let's say, with the spiritual path and spiritual teachings. So but what the commonality among all of the people is this idea of being pioneering, and that no matter if somebody has, very little familiarity with the spiritual life and they're just starting out on the spiritual path and trying to figure out what they're going to do, or if it's somebody who's been doing it for decades in their realm, that they are, in their community, they're pioneering. They're doing something that is new for them, and often new or different than what the people around them are doing. So they're in unfamiliar territory, even if they've been doing it for decades. They're still pushing the limits of, what else is out there? What more can I know? Where is wisdom? Tell me about this mystery, right? So that's the commonality. But I have people that come to me, that are totally new to it. They're just starting to ask the big questions, and then people who have been on the spiritual path for many decades, and some people who are very devoted to a certain practice where they may follow a certain guru, and then also do shamanism, right? Or they may be in a specific religion and a specific church, but then they also study other aspects of this spirituality from people who are doing it more independent of a specific religion. So it's a pretty wide breadth. And the other thing too is I do work with professionals. So people who are spiritual directors themselves, or who are life coaches, or who are serving other people, and who are caregivers themselves, because as we know, all of us caregivers also need care for our own souls. So, yeah.
Exactly. And I think we're always expanding, or at least we hope we are, rather than just, being stagnant in where we're at, whether it's, with spirituality or, anything that we have an interest in, or in life in general. Things are always changing. I'm wondering how you define spiritual direction, and how might someone know if they could benefit, from working with you or moving in that direction.
Yeah. So the term spiritual direction is actually a fairly Christian term. It comes from the Christian tradition, and has to do with this idea of having someone in the church who's ministering, individually, people, helping them delve deeper into matters of conscience, matters of their, questions or doubts they might have, feelings of loneliness. They're wondering, why is this happening to me? Or where is the divine? Where is God in all of this? And so that's, it can be a very kind of strict definition of spiritual direction as that, but it has started to expand over the last number of years to include people who are non-denominational, such as myself. And it being so, in my definition of it, the spiritual direction is I use that term because it's come into use and people are starting to understand what it means. But it's also kind of tricky term because it gives this impression that I'm here to direct you, which is not the case at all. And it's more so an act of companionship. But at the same time, I have a lead role in holding space. It's my job as a spiritual director to listen, and then to offer questions that might be helpful in terms of inquiry, in terms of helping someone deepen further into their own intuition and the messages that are coming from their own soul. So it's a practice on my part of a good deal of listening. And it's a practice for the directee, as they are called, to have an opportunity to just share in a safe, comfortable environment about those things that's not always comfortable to talk to, even close friends sometimes. These are those moments when these things happen to us that we're like, wow, or we start to have these ideas that we're thinking, wow, I wonder if I'm a little crazy, like what's going on here. So, those thoughts, also just the dreams, all of these things that are coming in through the imagination. Imagination isn't just for children. Imagination is actually a very powerful way to work with the soul. And so these messages that come through, these synchronicities, how do we connect all these together? Just trying to make some sense out of what can be quite irrational, quite nonsensical in the spiritual life. So I've noticed that just the act of holding space and listening as people talk through what's going on for them can be helpful. And then also offering compassion in the process. So there is a healing element to it in terms of the compassion and the grace in that sacred space that is offered for somebody. That can be very helpful as well. And then I do offer maybe try a prayer on this or a mantra on this or reading this text. Like I'll point people to different resources and as something for them to check out and see if that will help them where they are at a given time.
I really like the idea of imagination because you were talking earlier, when you're seeking spiritual direction and you're, however you choose to do, inner reflection and listening for guidance or intuition, whatever spirit, to communicate with you. As you were saying earlier, it's not necessarily through words. It's not like you're going to hear a clear message like go do this next. It could be in symbols and other types of language. So I think imagination is really important. In fact, on my YouTube channel, I do imagination starters because I just feel like it's really part of, my imagination and creativity are part of our sort of the sacred part of us. So I'm glad that, you're talking about imagination because it's just something that's important to me. And also science is really coming up now with all the benefits of adults being in that space. So I really like that you're talking about that, which kind of leads me into another topic I wanted to talk about that's also really important to me. When we talked before, you had mentioned your fascination with fairy tales and myths right now. And I find that so exciting. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about that and how does it relate to the spiritual path? And, archetypes, of course, figure into that. And I would just love to hear what you have to say on that topic.
Yeah, I was it last year or the year before, I even joined an oral storytelling group for a while when I had the energy for it, just because it was, and there's something about the oral storytelling, that's starting that movement is starting to come back as well. But just to plug in with that community was wonderful, and all the different resources that are available. The universality of fairy tales, it's just amazing to look at. We think of Cinderella and we think of a single version of that story, Charles Perrault version of Cinderella or something, and we think that's the fairy tale. Well, there's actually scholars out there who go around and collect fairy tales from different places and then categorize them. And so there is a whole category of Cinderella stories from Italy, from Portugal, from all over the place. And these Cinderella stories there's wildly different parts of them. Some of them there's talking dogs, and other ones there's talking trees. And, so there's these wildly different elements, but there's also throughout all these stories, there is these key symbols and themes that are always there. There's always the mother that dies. There's always the stepmother. There's always the stepsisters. There's these themes that go throughout them that you find. And so I love to read these many different versions and see these key themes that are always there. And those are the archetypal pieces. Absolutely, those are the archetypal pieces. And we can even trace the Cinderella story back to in Greek myth to the story of Eros and Psyche. Eros being Aphrodite's son, also known as Cupid, and then Psyche being just a princess in the beginning, eventually reaching the status of goddesshood. So, we can get hung up on this idea of like, what's the original story then, right? How do we, like Beauty and the Beast, or um, actually, sorry, Eros and Psyche is Beauty and the Beast, is the one that goes back for Beauty and the Beast. But we can get definitely caught up in, yeah, where's the original story? And then I want to get to the right answer, right? About that. Instead of looking at the fact that there are, in all these different cultures, myths as well, we see these common themes that keep coming through. And as we notice these common themes coming through, that tells us about what's in us as well. And so, in terms of the spiritual life, we can actually sit with different myths or different fairy tales and see what they reveal about our interior, rather than exteriorizing everything and saying, well, I'm Cinderella, she's the evil stepmother, they're the evil stepsisters, and pointing fingers and making everything literalized. We can instead take it into our soul and sit with it and say, okay, where is the evil stepmother in me? Where is the person that's cruel to me, that makes me sit in the ashes and makes me sort the grains and makes me stay home, that I won't let myself go to the ball? Where is the part of me that's harsh on myself in that way? And rather than trying to cut that part out, realizing that that is a part of all of us. It's a part of our nature. It's a part of nature. And so having compassion for it, and letting the story tell us how to deal with it. Letting the story show us that there is also the manifestation of the good mother there, in the fairy godmother that comes, or the birds that come and help her, or in some cases, the magical tree that gifts her with a dress. So then we look for the good mother that's there in spirit. So how is there a spirit around that is helping us, that is offering us aid in our times of most need? And so that's how we can start to both, look at it somewhat, from a psychological perspective, because that's what they do in psychology with a lot of these things. But also we're looking at it from a soul perspective, because we're looking for the spirit in things, or the spirit in us. We're looking at it from a much more mystical or magical point of view.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And it's like I said, it's a subject that just excites me to even hear you talk about it, because I find it so fascinating. And what strikes me is everything you were talking about, and I find this important, especially in, to us right now as a society, even a global society, is, whether you were talking about different religions, looking at different religions or spiritual paths, talking about shamanism and all of our DNA, if we trace it back far enough, we're going to find that was in that culture at some point. And also now the fairy tales, you can take each different culture or each different group of people and find that they also had a similar fairy tale. Mm-hmm. And so what's striking me is that connection of, all is one. And we don't have to really separate ourselves if we start looking at other groups of people, and in those ways that we have that connection. They have the same fairy tales, which tells us, we have something in common with them. Same thing with the religion, same thing with the DNA and the shamanism. So I feel like that's really important. And as a spiritual director too, I can see where that would be a very powerful tool that you have, that helps kind of bring us all together rather than separate us.
Yeah, exactly. And also helps bring ourselves into the fold.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've seen, this whole idea of connection is another, piece of the spiritual life that I definitely am fascinated about. And the thing is when we have our own problem over here, we get locked into the characters, in the problem and the situation. We can't see outside of it. And we can't see our way out of it. And one way to bring soul into that trouble that we're having is to bring a story to it. And then we can look at it both impersonally from the outside, but we also can view the story from the inside, with more compassion and with less of a feeling of being trapped, because now we see, oh, this is part of the human condition. This is part of human experience. And there's something in that can really breed a lot of compassion, and also can remind us that it's okay. We're not the only ones. We're not alone. And this is
Right.
hard. And this is hard. And there is a way through. And there is a way through.
Exactly. It can really help in making us, or leading us to not feel so alone with the challenges that we face. I think that's really, really important for us to do. So I think, we're just about out of time, Stacey. We could go on talking.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you'll come back and talk to us again,
Yes,
because this is
absolutely.
all really fascinating.
Yeah.
And like I told, the viewers, for anyone that wants to leave a comment and you didn't get to do it now, please leave it. I will be checking, and if you have a question or a comment for Stacey, I'll make sure that she knows it.
Right.
And before we wrap up, Stacey, I did put your website under, the video. So if anyone wants to look at a way to contact Stacey or me, that information, just look under the video and you'll find it there. But if you want to tell people that site, Stacey, if that's the best way to reach you, you can let them know.
Yeah, it's wildgratitude.com. Yeah.
Okay. So I would encourage Stacey's book and encourage you to reach out to her. I also want to mention that not next week, but the week after, which I think is the 28th of April. Can't believe it's already, half over. Grandmother Spider will be my guest, and I'm really looking forward to talking with her. So I think everyone will enjoy that show as well. So thank you very much, Stacey. Thank everyone for joining in, whether it's now or later, and please feel free to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.